What if I told you that Steve Jobs' billion-dollar success wasn't built on genius alone, but on a psychological system so precise, it could turn almost anyone into a high performer? Look, we've all heard the Steve Jobs mythology, the garage startup, the comeback story, the revolutionary products. But what nobody talks about is the mental architecture behind it all, the specific psychological frameworks that Jobs used to engineer not just products, but his own mind for success. Today we're going deep. We're reverse engineering the actual system Jobs used to build Apple into a trillion-dollar empire. And more importantly, I'm going to show you exactly how to apply these same psychological principles to your own life, starting today. This isn't about copying his personality or trying to become the next Steve Jobs. This is about understanding the science behind what made him successful and then building your own version of that system. So if you're tired of surface-level productivity tips and you want to understand how elite performers actually think and operate, stick around, because what you're about to learn could completely change how you approach success. Here's what most people miss about Steve Jobs. His success wasn't random. It wasn't just about having good ideas or being in the right place at the right time. Jobs had what I call a psychological operating system, a set of mental frameworks that guided every decision, every habit, every interaction. And the crazy thing? Most of these frameworks are backed by modern behavioral psychology and neuroscience. Jobs was essentially doing what scientists now prove works decades before the research caught up. Let me break down the 3 core psychological frameworks that made Jobs who he was, and more importantly, how you can build your own version of each one. Framework number 1, extreme focus through systematic elimination. Jobs once said, "Focus is about saying no to the 1,000 good ideas." But here's what's fascinating from a psychology perspective. Jobs didn't just practice focus, he systematized it. When he returned to Apple in 1997, the company had over 350 products. Within a year, he cut that down to just 10. That's not just business strategy, that's applied psychology. Jobs understood something called decision fatigue before it was even a term. Here's the science. Your brain has limited cognitive resources. Every decision you make, every option you consider, depletes your mental energy. Jobs eliminated 97% of Apple's products not just to streamline the business, but to free up mental bandwidth for what actually mattered. But here's where it gets really interesting. Jobs applied this same principle to his personal life. He wore the same outfit every day: black turtleneck, jeans, New Balance sneakers. Why? Because he understood that small decisions compound into cognitive overload. How can you apply this to your life? Start with what I call the Jobs audit. Look at your current projects, commitments, and daily decisions. If you're like most people, you're probably trying to do too much. Here's a simple exercise. Write down everything you're currently working on or committed to. Now rank them by impact. The brutal truth? You should probably eliminate 80% of what's on that list. This isn't about being lazy. It's about understanding that your brain is designed to do fewer things at a higher level, not more things at a mediocre level. Jobs proved this over and over again. Framework number 2, the psychology of perfectionism. Now, Jobs was famous for being a perfectionist. But here's what most people get wrong. His perfectionism wasn't emotional, it was systematic. There's a huge difference. Most perfectionists get paralyzed by their own standards. They never ship, never finish, never move forward. But Jobs had what psychologists call adaptive perfectionism. Perfectionism that actually drives performance rather than destroying it. Here's how his system worked. Jobs would set impossibly high standards, but he'd couple that with what I call iteration obsession. He didn't expect to get it perfect on the first try. Instead, he expected to iterate relentlessly until it was perfect. The original iPhone went through over 67 different prototypes. 67. That's not perfectionism paralysis. That's systematic perfectionism. Jobs understood that perfection isn't about getting it right once. It's about being willing to get it wrong 66 times until you get it right on attempt 67. From a neuroscience perspective, this makes perfect sense. Every iteration strengthens the neural pathways associated with quality and attention to detail. Jobs was literally rewiring his brain and his team's brains to operate at a higher standard. How can you apply this to your life? Stop trying to make things perfect on the first try. Instead, adopt what I call the Jobs iteration protocol. Here's how it works. When you're working on something important, whether that's a business project, a creative endeavor, or even a personal goal, commit to at least 5 iterations before you consider it done. Version 1 is about getting it functional. Version 2 is about making it better. Version 3 is about making it good. Version 4 is about making it great. And version 5, that's where the magic happens. That's where good becomes exceptional. The key is to separate the creative process from the evaluation process. Create first, perfect later. Jobs mastered this, and it's why Apple products always felt like they were in a category of their own. Framework number 3, reality distortion as applied psychology. Now here's where things get really interesting. Jobs was famous for something called the reality distortion field, his ability to convince people that impossible things were possible. Most people think this was just charisma or manipulation, but from a psychological standpoint, Jobs was actually using several well-documented cognitive principles. First, he understood something called expectancy theory, the idea that people perform better when they believe exceptional results are possible. But here's the genius part. Jobs didn't just set high expectations, he made people feel like those expectations were achievable. He did this through what psychologists call proximal goal setting. Instead of saying, "We need to revolutionize computing," he'd say, "We need to make this boot up 3 seconds faster." Instead of "create the perfect phone," it was "make the scroll feel more natural." Jobs would take these massive, seemingly impossible visions and break them down into specific, concrete challenges that felt difficult but doable. This is pure behavioral psychology. Our brains are wired to respond to clear, specific targets. But here's what really made the reality distortion field work. Jobs combined high expectations with what psychologists call psychological safety. People knew he demanded excellence, but they also knew he believed they could achieve it. That combination is incredibly powerful. So, how can you apply this to your life? You can create your own version of the reality distortion field, both for yourself and for the people around you. Start with what I call impossible possible translation. Take any big goal you have, something that feels overwhelming or impossible. Now break it down into the smallest possible next step that feels challenging but achievable. Let's say you want to start a business. Don't think, "I need to build $1 million company." Think, "I need to validate one business idea this week." That's your proximal goal. Then, once you hit that micro goal, you celebrate it and set the next one. This creates what neuroscientists call a success spiral. Each small win releases dopamine, which motivates you to tackle the next challenge. Jobs understood this instinctively. He knew that confidence isn't built through affirmations or positive thinking. It's built through evidence, proof that you can do hard things. Here's what ties all of these psychological frameworks together. Jobs never relied on motivation. He built systems. Think about it. His daily routine, his decision-making process, his approach to perfectionism, these weren't things he had to psych himself up to do. They were just how he operated. They were built into his identity and his environment in a way that made them automatic. This is the difference between successful people and everyone else. Most people rely on willpower and motivation, which are finite resources. Elite performers like Jobs build systems that work regardless of how they feel on any given day. So here's how you can start building your own psychological operating system, starting today. Week 1, the focus audit. Do that elimination exercise I mentioned earlier. Cut out everything that isn't essential. Yes, it will be uncomfortable. But remember, Jobs cut 97% of Apple's products to focus on the 3% that mattered. Week 2, implement iteration thinking. Pick one project or goal you've been struggling with. Instead of trying to perfect it, commit to creating 5 versions. Focus on progress, not perfection. Each iteration should be 20% better than the last. Week 3, practice impossible possible translation. Take your biggest, scariest goal and break it down into micro-challenges. What's the smallest step you could take today that would move you forward? Week 4, systematize your success. Look at the habits and routines that are actually working for you. How can you make them more automatic? How can you build them into your environment so they happen without willpower? Remember, Jobs didn't become Jobs overnight. These psychological frameworks were developed and refined over decades. But the beautiful thing about systems is that they compound. Small, consistent improvements in how you think and operate can lead to massive results over time. Here's the truth that most people don't want to hear. Steve Jobs wasn't born with some magical success gene. He was just incredibly systematic about understanding and applying the psychology of high performance. Everything we talked about today, extreme focus, systematic perfectionism, reality distortion, building systems over relying on motivation, these aren't personality traits. They're learnable skills. They're frameworks you can adapt and apply to your own life. The question isn't whether you have what it takes to be successful. The question is whether you're willing to build the mental architecture that makes success inevitable. If you want more deep dives into the psychological systems behind success, the real frameworks, not the surface-level advice, make sure you're subscribed with notifications on. Because here at Atomic Success, we're just getting started. We're building a community of people who understand that real growth isn't about motivation or inspiration. It's about systems, psychology, and the relentless pursuit of becoming 1% better every single day. Next video, we're diving into something that's going to completely change how you think about breaking bad habits and rewiring your brain for success. This isn't your typical dopamine detox. We're going deep into the 2025 science of how your brain actually works and the exact protocols you can use to break free from the patterns that are sabotaging your success. Until then, remember, less hype, more systems, real results. I'll see you in the next one.